The airport was full of energy that morning. Families with children hurried toward check-in counters, business travelers typed quickly on their laptops while waiting in line, and the sound of rolling suitcases echoed across the hall. Among the many travelers stood a woman named Alicia. She had arrived early, as she always did when she traveled. Alicia was a calm and confident person who enjoyed exploring the world, but she also carried a sense of responsibility because she often represented her country in professional and community programs. That day, her destination was important. She was scheduled to speak at a global event, where leaders from around the world were gathering to discuss development and cooperation. Alicia knew her voice mattered there, not just for herself but for many people back home. She carried her neatly packed suitcase, a handbag with her documents, and, most importantly, her passport. It was not just a small book of pages. To her, it was proof of her hard work, her identity, and the ability to stand proudly among people from different nations. As she walked toward the immigration counter, Alicia kept her smile. She greeted the officer politely, placed her passport on the desk, and waited for the usual stamp. Usually, this process took only a few minutes, but today was different. The officer frowned as he looked at the passport, turning the pages back and forth again and again. Alicia noticed his face harden, his eyes narrowing as if he had discovered something troubling. "Where did you get this passport?" he asked suddenly. Alicia was surprised by the tone. She calmly replied, "This is my passport. It was issued by the government. Everything is in order." But the officer did not seem convinced. He called over two more officers, who stood close and began to whisper among themselves. Travelers waiting in line behind Alicia started watching curiously, wondering what the issue was. Alicia felt a mix of emotions rising inside her: confusion, uneasiness, and a quiet worry that something unusual was about to happen. The second officer picked up the passport, examined the photograph, and compared it with Alicia's face. "It doesn't look real," he muttered. The words were sharp, and they cut through the air like a knife. Alicia's calmness remained on the outside, but her heart beat faster. "I assure you," she said with steady confidence, "this is a genuine document. I travel often, and I've never had an issue." The officers exchanged doubtful glances. One of them shook his head and whispered something Alicia could not hear. Then, in an act that seemed both careless and unbelievable, one officer placed her passport to the side, muttering, "This is fake. Worthless." Before Alicia could even process the words, the officer did something that left her speechless. He pulled out a lighter from his pocket and, without warning, set the edge of the passport on fire. Alicia's eyes widened in disbelief as the flames quickly spread across the cover, curling the pages and reducing them to ashes. The smell of burnt paper filled the air. The other officers looked uneasy but said nothing. Alicia stood frozen. Her passport, the very document that connected her to her country and the world, was gone in front of her eyes. She felt a wave of humiliation. Around her, travelers whispered, some gasping at what they had just seen. No one had expected such a shocking act at an airport where documents were supposed to be handled with care. Taking a deep breath, Alicia looked straight at the officers. Her voice was calm, but there was a firmness in her tone. "You have destroyed my passport. Do you realize what you have done?" The officers avoided her eyes. One of them looked nervous now, as though he had started to realize the seriousness of the situation. Another simply crossed his arms, pretending to be in control. But inside, there was a quiet tension. Something about this incident was not right, and they knew it. Alicia, meanwhile, tried to remain composed. She reminded herself not to let anger show. She was someone who believed in dignity, even in the most unfair situations. But deep down, her mind was racing with questions. Why had they done this? Was it because of her appearance, her confidence, or something else entirely? She felt stripped of her rights in that moment, left without a voice in front of strangers who seemed determined not to listen. Travelers around the hall continued to whisper. Some pulled out their phones, recording short clips of the incident, sensing that this was more than just a simple misunderstanding. Alicia noticed but stayed focused on the officers in front of her. "I expect you to explain this," she said firmly. "I have a right to travel. You cannot take that away from me." The officers mumbled among themselves. Their earlier confidence seemed to be fading. One of them tried to suggest that she could apply for a temporary document, but Alicia interrupted with grace and strength. "That was my passport. It was valid. You destroyed it. You will answer for this." At that moment, even though she stood alone in the middle of the busy airport hall, Alicia carried herself with such quiet strength that people watching began to feel sympathy and respect for her. She was not shouting, she was not creating chaos, but her calm determination spoke louder than any loud voice could. As the officers tried to hide their uneasiness, Alicia stood tall, reminding herself that truth was on her side. She had no passport now, no document in her hand, but what she did have was the power of her presence, her dignity, and the certainty that the story was far from over. And while she could not know it yet, this incident was about to change everything, not just for her but for the officers as well. The flames that had eaten Alicia's passport still lingered in the minds of everyone who had witnessed the act. The ashes had been brushed aside quickly, but the damage was done. The officers, who just minutes ago carried themselves with boldness, now stood restless. Something in Alicia's calm but firm voice had unsettled them. They had destroyed an official document, and now, without it, she had become both a victim and a witness to their recklessness. One of the younger officers, who had been silent during the entire exchange, leaned closer to his senior. "We should run a check," he whispered. His tone carried unease. The senior officer nodded reluctantly, motioning him to access the internal system. Alicia stood silently, watching them with sharp eyes. She could feel that they were beginning to regret what had just happened. She had learned long ago that sometimes silence spoke more powerfully than 1,000 words. Her silence, combined with her steady gaze, made the officers fidget in their seats. The younger officer typed quickly on his computer, entering Alicia's details from the record she had filled out earlier at the airline counter. His eyes moved across the screen, scanning line after line of information. At first, nothing seemed unusual. But then his face stiffened. He leaned back slowly, his eyes wide with shock. He turned to his senior officer and said in a low voice, "You need to see this." The senior officer frowned, impatient, and leaned over the screen. Within seconds, his own expression changed. He blinked rapidly, as though he couldn't believe what he was reading. The other officers gathered closer. On the screen, the identity details revealed the truth. Alicia was not just any traveler. She was the wife of the Attorney General. For a few moments, silence filled the small immigration booth. The weight of the discovery pressed down on them heavily. Their careless decision had not only insulted a traveler but had directly offended the family of one of the most powerful officials in the country. The senior officer's hands began to tremble slightly. He tried to compose himself, but his voice betrayed his nervousness. "Are you certain this is correct?" The younger officer nodded. "Yes. It's all here. It matches perfectly. She is the Attorney General's wife." The color drained from the senior officer's face. He glanced nervously toward Alicia, who stood with calm patience, her presence commanding more authority now than ever before. Another officer whispered, "We've made a mistake. A big one." Panic spread quickly among them. One muttered about losing his job. Another imagined the shame of being publicly exposed. The senior officer, usually confident and loud, now found himself struggling to breathe steadily. The realization was too heavy. They had not only disrespected an innocent person, they had set fire to a passport belonging to someone who could bring the full force of the law down upon them. Trying to regain control of the situation, the senior officer cleared his throat and forced a weak smile. "Ma'am," he said softly, his tone now completely changed, "there seems to have been a misunderstanding." Alicia raised her eyebrows slightly. She did not respond immediately. She wanted to see how far they would go in their attempts to cover their mistake. The officer continued, "We will arrange for a replacement document right away. Please, allow us to handle this. You will not face any problem." His words sounded rehearsed, hollow, almost desperate. Alicia could sense the fear behind them. For a moment, she thought of the flames consuming her passport, of the humiliation she had felt when strangers whispered around her. And now, here were the same men, their confidence gone, their pride replaced with worry. She spoke with quiet strength. "You destroyed my passport without listening to me. You treated me as though I had no right to stand here. And now, only after checking your system, you realize who I am. Tell me, would you be apologizing if I were not the Attorney General's wife?" Her question hung in the air. The officers had no answer. They looked down, avoiding her eyes, ashamed but also fearful. They knew she had spoken the truth. The younger officer tried to whisper something about rushing the process, but the senior silenced him with a sharp look. Then, turning back to Alicia, the senior officer said, "We sincerely regret what happened. Please give us some time. We will make this right." But Alicia did not nod. She did not reassure them. Instead, she simply stood there, her silence heavier than any argument. The officers exchanged nervous glances. One of them rubbed his forehead, another tapped his fingers nervously against the desk. The room felt smaller, hotter, as though the weight of their mistake had trapped them inside. Meanwhile, word of the incident was beginning to spread beyond the booth. Other airport staff had overheard bits of conversation. Some had caught a glimpse of the burning passport. And now, whispers traveled quickly among employees, "That woman is important. Something serious happened at immigration." The officers realized they could not contain the situation for long. News had a way of escaping walls, especially when witnesses had already seen too much. The senior officer ordered one of his men to contact a higher authority at the airport immediately. His voice trembled slightly as he spoke on the phone, explaining in vague terms that there had been a serious mistake involving a high-profile traveler. As he spoke, Alicia observed him carefully. She could see the nervous sweat forming on his forehead, the way his voice cracked. She realized that their panic was not just about her identity, it was about the consequences that would soon follow. When the call ended, the officer tried once again to soften his tone. "Please, madam, remain calm. We are doing everything to fix this." Alicia finally spoke, her voice calm but unyielding. "I was calm when I first handed you my passport. It was you who did not listen. I will remain calm now too, but understand this, what you have done cannot be undone with quick words or false politeness." Her words pierced through the thin layer of excuses they had tried to build. The officers fell silent again. Their earlier arrogance was gone, replaced by dread. In those tense minutes, the entire atmosphere of the booth had shifted. When Alicia first arrived, the officers had believed they had full control, power to judge her and her documents. But now, that power had slipped away. It was Alicia who stood strong, and they who trembled in uncertainty. And deep down, each of them knew one thing for certain: the real storm had not yet begun. Once higher officials and the Attorney General himself learned of this act, their careers, and perhaps much more, would be on the line. The tension inside the immigration booth felt heavy, like a cloud that refused to leave. Alicia stood tall, her face calm but her eyes sharp, while the officers around her struggled to keep their composure. They knew their mistake was too big to cover, yet they still tried to act as though they had things under control. Soon, A senior airport administrator rushed in, his suit slightly wrinkled from moving quickly across the terminal. His face was flushed with worry. He had received the call only minutes earlier and already sensed the seriousness of the problem. He looked from the nervous officers to Alicia, immediately realizing who she was. "Madam," he said respectfully, bowing his head slightly, "please forgive the situation. I will personally take care of everything." Alicia didn't reply right away. She watched him carefully, her silence demanding more honesty than words could. The administrator turned toward the officers, his voice low but firm. "What exactly happened here?" The senior officer shifted uncomfortably, avoiding direct eye contact. "There was confusion. We suspected the passport was not valid. In the process, it was damaged." "Damaged?" The administrator's voice rose slightly, his disbelief clear. "Is that what you call burning a passport?" The officer's face turned pale. He had hoped to soften the truth, but the administrator wasn't interested in half explanations. He knew the incident could not be hidden. Too many witnesses had already seen what happened. By now, a small crowd of passengers had gathered near the booth, pretending to wait for their turn while secretly watching. Some had already shared brief updates on their phones. Words like passport, burned, and Attorney General's wife were spreading quickly, not only inside the airport but beyond its walls. The administrator realized time was slipping away. He needed to calm the situation before it spiraled further. Turning back to Alicia, he spoke gently. "Madam, we will issue an emergency travel document for you. Please allow us to correct this immediately." Alicia's expression remained steady. "An emergency document will not replace what was done here. My passport was valid. It was destroyed in front of me. Do you think this can be solved so easily?" Her words carried weight, and the administrator knew she was right. This was no small mistake. The act had not only humiliated her but also broken trust in the system itself. He nodded slowly, acknowledging the truth without trying to deny it. "Madam," he said carefully, "a full report will be prepared. These officers will face an inquiry. I assure you, action will be taken." The officers standing behind him felt their knees weaken. They had never imagined their routine day at work would turn into such a disaster. Some whispered quietly to each other, blaming one another for what had happened. But deep down, each of them knew they were equally responsible. Alicia listened but did not soften. She was not looking for quick apologies. She wanted accountability. She wanted them to understand the gravity of what they had done, not just to her, but to the principles of fairness and respect. As the administrator tried to calm her, more airport officials arrived, their presence adding to the pressure. They quickly ushered the curious passengers away, but whispers continued to echo across the hall. Travelers who had witnessed the incident told others what they had seen, and within minutes, the story was alive in multiple conversations. One traveler murmured to another, "They burned her passport, can you believe it?" Another replied, "And she's the Attorney General's wife. They're in serious trouble now." The atmosphere of the airport shifted. What had started as an ordinary morning was now a scene of scandal. Meanwhile, Alicia sat in a private waiting area, escorted there by the administrator. She remained calm, but inside she reflected on the humiliation she had endured. She thought of the people who didn't have her position, her connections, or her voice, those who might have suffered quietly in similar situations without anyone noticing. The thought made her heart heavy. The officers who had been involved were now called into a separate room. The administrator questioned them harshly, demanding explanations. Each officer tried to defend himself, but their words sounded weak. One insisted he truly believed the passport was fake. Another claimed he had only followed instructions. The one who had set the passport on fire said little, his face pale with regret. The administrator shook his head in frustration. "Do you understand what you have done? This is not only unprofessional, it is unlawful. You cannot treat people like this. Do you realize whose passport you destroyed? They remained silent. Their arrogance had disappeared completely, replaced with fear. Back in the waiting area, staff tried to make Alicia comfortable, offering her refreshments and assuring her that everything was under control. But she knew better. This was no small accident they could sweep aside. She had seen the look of panic in their eyes, the sudden change in their voices once they discovered who she was. She thought again about her earlier question: would they have apologized if she had been an ordinary woman without any important connection? She knew the answer, and it troubled her deeply. As the minutes passed, more senior officials from the airport and the National Immigration Office arrived. They spoke in hushed tones, their faces tense. Some even avoided walking too close to Alicia, fearful of her reaction. They were already thinking about the headlines that might appear if the story reached the media. But the story had already begun to escape. A young traveler who had filmed a short clip of the burning passport had sent it to a friend, and that friend had shared it online. By the time the senior officials were trying to contain the damage, the video was beginning to spread rapidly on social media. The administrator received a call, his face turning even paler as he listened. The news was clear: the incident was now public. He hung up slowly, realizing that no amount of careful words could hide what had happened. He walked back to Alicia, speaking with more urgency now. "Madam, the matter is being reported outside the airport. I request your patience. A full investigation will begin immediately. Please know, this will not go unanswered." Alicia looked at him calmly. "I have patience. But understand this: it is not just about me. It is about respect for every traveler who passes through here. What happened to me could happen to anyone. That is why this cannot be ignored." Her words struck him. He nodded in agreement, realizing she was right. This incident was no longer about a single passport. It was about trust, fairness, and accountability. As she sat quietly, the airport buzzed with frantic energy. Officers rushed between rooms, phones rang endlessly, and officials argued over how to manage the crisis. But one thing was certain: the simple act of burning a passport had now set off a chain of events that none of them could stop. And while Alicia remained composed, the officers who had been responsible felt the full weight of their mistake pressing down on them. They could already see the future unfolding: the inquiries, the disciplinary actions, the shame of being named publicly. For Alicia, however, this was not the end. She knew the real journey had only begun. The public would soon learn the truth, and once that happened, the voices demanding justice would be far louder than hers alone. News travels faster than airplanes. Within hours of the incident, the story had already found its way out of the airport and onto the screens of thousands of people. The short video clip of the passport being burned was being shared widely, and with each repost, the reactions grew louder. By afternoon, hashtags were trending. People expressed their shock and anger online. Comments poured in: "This is unacceptable. If this can happen to the Attorney General's wife, what happens to ordinary citizens? We need answers." Civil rights organizations began speaking out too. For years, they had heard stories of travelers being mistreated, questioned unfairly, or treated with suspicion simply because of their appearance. But rarely did those stories reach the public. Now, with undeniable video proof and the high-profile identity of the victim, the matter could not be ignored. At the airport, the administrators scrambled to control the damage. Extra meetings were held, and official statements were drafted, but nothing seemed strong enough to calm the growing storm. The officers who had been involved were temporarily suspended while the investigation began, but even that announcement failed to satisfy the public. People wanted more than suspension: they wanted justice. Alicia, meanwhile, had returned home quietly. She had no desire to stand in front of cameras or give interviews right away. She wanted time to process what had happened. She replayed the scene in her mind again and again, the moment her passport caught fire, the whispers of travelers, the sudden change in the officers' behavior once they realized who she was. She sat in her living room that evening, sipping tea, when her husband walked in. The Attorney General, a man known for his sharp mind and firm decisions, looked at her with concern. "I heard everything," he said softly. "Are you all right?" Alicia gave a small smile, though her eyes revealed the heaviness in her heart. "I'm fine," she said. "But I keep thinking, if this happened to me, imagine what happens to people who don't have anyone to stand up for them." Her husband nodded, his expression serious. "That's exactly why this incident cannot be hidden. It is not only personal. It is about fairness for everyone." The next day, the story appeared on the front page of newspapers. Headlines screamed about the shocking act at the airport, the mistreatment of the Attorney General's wife, and the questions of discrimination and abuse of power. Editorials were written, television debates were held, and reporters gathered outside the airport demanding statements from officials. Alicia found herself at the center of attention, though she had never asked for it. She received calls from friends, family, and strangers alike. Some offered support, while others encouraged her to speak out publicly. Finally, after much thought, she agreed to give a short statement to the press. Standing calmly in front of microphones, she spoke in her simple yet powerful way. "What happened to me at the airport was wrong," she said. "But this is not just about me. This is about the way travelers are treated every day. A passport is more than paper, it is identity, it is dignity. No one has the right to destroy that. I want to make sure no one else has to experience what I did." Her words struck deeply. She didn't raise her voice or use dramatic language, but her sincerity and grace touched people. She became a symbol, not only of the incident itself but of the need for change. Civil rights groups quickly rallied behind her. They organized peaceful gatherings, wrote open letters to government officials, and demanded reforms in immigration and airport practices. University students held discussions, activists launched petitions, and everyday citizens shared their own travel stories online, many of them describing moments when they, too, felt humiliated or unfairly treated. The government could no longer stay silent. Pressure built daily. The Attorney General, though personally connected to the matter, addressed the nation in his professional role. In a televised speech, he spoke firmly: "No citizen, no traveler, should ever be treated with disrespect. What happened at the airport was unacceptable. An investigation has begun, and those responsible will face consequences. But beyond that, we must bring change to ensure fairness and accountability in all our institutions." The speech was widely praised, but people also watched closely to see if real action would follow. Promises had been made before in other cases, and citizens were tired of empty words. Inside the airport itself, employees felt the shift. Training sessions were ordered, stricter guidelines were introduced, and officers were warned that mistreatment of travelers would no longer be tolerated. Posters were even placed around terminals reminding both staff and passengers of their rights and responsibilities. But the real force of change came from the public. Alicia's story had awakened something in people, a belief that standing up against unfair treatment was possible, that silence was no longer the only option. One afternoon, Alicia visited a community center where activists had gathered. They invited her to speak, and though she had not planned to, she agreed. Standing before a room full of young people, she shared her thoughts honestly. "When that officer burned my passport," she said, "I felt powerless for a moment. But then I remembered power is not only in documents or positions. It is in standing up for what is right. That is why I am here today. I don't want this to be only my story. I want it to be our story, a turning point for all of us." The audience applauded warmly, some even with tears in their eyes. For them, Alicia was more than the Attorney General's wife. She was a voice for justice, a reminder that dignity should never be destroyed. Meanwhile, the officers involved faced growing consequences. Internal reports revealed their actions step by step, leaving no room for excuses. Their careers, once secure, now hung in uncertainty. Some regretted deeply, others tried to defend themselves, but the truth was clear: they had acted without fairness, and now they would have to answer for it. The world outside continued to watch closely. News agencies from other countries reported the story, making it international. Questions were raised not only about the airport but about the nation's image itself. Leaders realized that reform was not just a local matter, it was necessary to maintain global trust. And through it all, Alicia remained steady. She did not seek revenge or personal glory. She only wanted justice and change. In interviews, she repeated the same simple message: this is bigger than me. It is about respect for every traveler, for every person. Her calm strength became an example. Many who had once felt voiceless found courage in her story. People began to believe that even in the face of humiliation, dignity could be restored, and truth could shine through. By the time weeks had passed, Alicia's name was known not only for being the Attorney General's wife but for being the woman who had turned a painful incident into a call for fairness. And yet, she knew the journey was not finished. Investigations were still ongoing, public demands were still rising, and the road to real reform was long. But one thing was certain: silence was broken, and change had begun. The days turned into weeks, but the memory of the airport incident did not fade. Instead, it grew stronger. Each time the story was discussed on television, printed in newspapers, or shared online, new layers of conversation began. People no longer spoke of it as just one woman's passport being destroyed. It became a story of justice, accountability, and the need for change in how people were treated. For Alicia, life seemed both normal and unusual at the same time. At home, she continued with her routine, meeting family, working on community projects, and preparing for her international engagements. Yet everywhere she went, people recognized her. Strangers came up to her in markets, on streets, and at events to express their support. Some thanked her for speaking out, others shared their own painful experiences of being treated unfairly at borders, offices, or checkpoints. She listened to them all with patience. Each story reminded her that her own experience had opened a door for many others who had long stayed silent. Meanwhile, the official investigation into the airport incident moved forward. A panel of senior officials was appointed to examine exactly what had happened that morning. They collected testimonies from witnesses, reviewed video recordings, and studied the reports filed by the officers themselves. The evidence was clear. The officers had acted without proper procedure. They had dismissed Alicia's explanations without verifying her details properly, and the act of burning the passport was found to be reckless and unlawful. The panel's findings left no room for excuses. One morning, the Attorney General held a press conference. Standing at the podium, he read the official report in front of journalists and citizens. His voice was calm but firm as he explained the conclusions. The inquiry has confirmed that the officers involved acted irresponsibly, he said. Their actions showed a lack of professionalism, respect, and fairness. Immediate disciplinary action has been taken, and new reforms are being introduced to ensure this never happens again. Reporters filled the room with questions. Some asked about the punishments, others about the reforms. The Attorney General explained that the officers had been suspended permanently, with the possibility of facing further legal consequences. More importantly, he announced new measures: compulsory training programs on fairness and equality for all airport and immigration staff, stronger supervision systems, and clear channels for passengers to report mistreatment without fear. The announcement was welcomed by the public. For many, it was the first time they had seen swift and serious action taken against such behavior. Social media filled with comments praising the decision. Civil rights groups, while acknowledging the progress, also promised to keep watching to make sure the reforms were not forgotten after the headlines faded. Through all of this, Alicia remained humble. She did not seek to be the center of attention, but her quiet presence continued to inspire. When asked by journalists about her reaction to the officer's punishment, she responded simply, "This was never about revenge. It was about fairness. I only hope that what happened will lead to better treatment for everyone, no matter who they are." Her words once again touched people. She showed no bitterness, only a strong sense of justice. That balanced firmness without anger made her message even more powerful. As weeks passed, the impact of the incident became visible. At the airport where it had all begun, changes could be seen. New signs reminded officers of their duty to treat passengers with respect. Supervisors walked the floors more often, observing interactions closely. Travelers noticed a difference too. Lines moved more smoothly, officers greeted people more politely, and there was a sense that the lessons of the past had started to reshape the future. But Alicia knew that true change was not measured only in new signs or policies. It was measured in how people felt, whether they felt respected, heard, and valued. That was why she continued speaking at community events and forums, reminding everyone that reforms were only as strong as the people who carried them out. One evening, she was invited to a university to speak to students studying law, politics, and social sciences. The auditorium was full, with hundreds of young faces eager to listen. Alicia stood on stage, her voice calm but steady as she shared her thoughts. "Dignity is not a gift from others," she said. "It is something every person carries within themselves. But systems and institutions have the power to either respect it or harm it. What happened to me was painful, but it also reminded me of the importance of standing firm. Change comes when we refuse to stay silent. I want each of you to remember that. No matter where you are, no matter who you meet, treat people with respect. It is the simplest act, yet it has the power to change lives." The students applauded warmly, many inspired to carry those words into their own futures. Some approached her afterward to thank her, telling her they wanted to become the kind of leaders who upheld fairness in their work. In the following months, Alicia traveled again, this time with a renewed sense of purpose. At international conferences, she not only spoke about development and cooperation but also about dignity and justice in everyday systems. Her story had crossed borders, and people in other countries wanted to hear it too. Many could relate, having experienced unfair treatment themselves. Everywhere she went, she carried the same message: respect, fairness, and accountability must never be negotiable. At home, her husband continued to support her quietly, proud of how she had turned a painful experience into a movement for good. Their children, too, looked at her with admiration, learning that courage does not always mean raising one's voice, it sometimes means standing tall in silence and speaking with calm strength. As time passed, the noise of the original scandal grew softer, replaced by new events in the world. But its impact did not disappear. It lived on in the changes made at airports, in the conversations sparked in communities, and in the hope it gave to people who once felt powerless. Alicia herself moved forward, but she never forgot. Each time she picked up her new passport, she remembered the flames that had destroyed the old one, and she reminded herself of the lesson: a person's worth is never defined by how others treat them, but by how they choose to stand in moments of trial. Her story became more than a headline. It became a reminder that even in the face of injustice, dignity can survive, truth can prevail, and one voice can awaken many. And though Alicia did not seek recognition, she had become, in the eyes of many, a quiet hero, someone who taught the world that respect is not a privilege for the few, but a right for all.